Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof, and it's May 13th, 2021. And this is the Dissenter Weekly. But before we get rolling on our whistleblower stories for this week, Brian, like always, has a few things to tell you.
Hello, everybody. Just reminding you that wherever you're watching, please make sure that you are subscribed or following or liked or whatever the protocol is where you are. That way you get our updates when we do this show, as well as the reporting that we publish at Shadowproof and at the Dissenter newsletter becoming website that Kevin has got going on over there. So just make sure you're following us. And as always, we are 100% reader funded. No big donors, no corporate sponsors, none of that. All of our money comes from small donations from people like you. So if you like what we're doing, if you want Kevin to keep going, just chip in. You can go to shadowproof.com/donate or dissenter.substack.com, and we'll run through that stuff at the end of the show here. So let's get into our stories for this week. The first is a great piece that you published. We have whistleblower Craig Murray sentenced to prison over blog posts. What is this story?
Yeah, so this is a story that I doubt got the attention it deserves, but fortunately I was able to get something published as part of the Dissenter newsletter so that we could cover it. Former UK diplomat turned whistleblower Craig Murray was sentenced to 8 months in prison at the High Court in Edinburgh. That's Scotland. So it was for contempt of court resulting from his coverage of the trial of former Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond. And that is as reported by Mohammed Al-Mazi. And for the newsletter, Mohammed put together a report on the prison sentence that went into thorough detail on this political case. I was really grateful for him to do this. There were some aspects of this case that even I didn't understand before he outlined them very clearly. And so for those of you who are being introduced for the first time to what happened with Craig Murray, as Mohammed detailed, a 3-judge panel determined on March 25th, 2021, after a 2-hour trial in January, that information that was published by Murray in a number of his blog posts was likely to lead indirectly to people being able to identify witnesses in Salmond's sexual assault trial. That is, without going into the details, this former Scottish first minister had faced a sexual assault case, was acquitted or not convicted. And this process, known as jigsaw identification, refers to the possibility, as Mohammed described it, that a person may piece together information from various sources to arrive at the identification of a protected witness. In doing so, the judge ruled that Murray violated a court order prohibiting the publication of information that could likely lead to the identification of alleged victims in Salmond's case. To those who do not know him, Murray has been involved in broadcasting, journalism, human rights advocacy. He's extensively written and followed closely the prosecution against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. He supports whistleblowers throughout the world. He was a supporter of Salmond, and he also supports the campaign for independence by Scotland. He denies the charges and argues that, in fact, he went to great pains to report on this trial without identifying any of the witnesses. Reporters Without Borders tweeted in reaction to this sentence that it was concerned. This press freedom organization was, quote, concerned by the prison sentence given to Craig Murray in Scotland in connection with his blogging on the Alex Salmond case, a disproportionate measure on nebulous grounds of so-called jigsaw identification, while other media reported similarly. In other words, that he was likely singled out because of who he is and the political kinds of stances he is willing to take as someone who is an ex-diplomat and a whistleblower who frequently challenges the British government, including its security apparatus. And so that basically summarizes the case. There's a lot more detail that I encourage you, if you're interested, to go read. This got some good, it was distributed very nicely. I want to give a lot of gratitude to people like John Pilger and some other high profile people who shared it. And then I know that Craig Murray himself actually appreciated the work that Muhammad did as well, feeling like it encapsulated many of the issues that are at stake in this case. And this is a perhaps not as crucial, not as dangerous press freedom case. That when you look at Julian Assange's case, it's much more significant. At the same time, it would be quite easy for anyone to run afoul of this if they decided to do their own so-called grassroots journalism or citizen journalism, however you want to call it, and they were following along a trial and they reported on whatever they were hearing in the trial, and then it was later determined because the people in power didn't like what you wrote about it, it would be possible for them to retaliate and say that you had put out details in your blog posts that could lead somebody to identify the witnesses. It's very easy to conjure up that kind of a claim against somebody in order to go after and suppress them in the work that they do. And that's, I think, the key issue here with this Craig Murray case. So he's going to appeal. I'll just end there that he's going to appeal, and we'll see what happens with whether he ends up serving the prison sentence or not. There will be more updates to come.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Muhammad, for that piece. Why don't you take us through our next story here? We have whistleblowers demand Colorado expand its investigation into air pollution agency.
Yeah, thank you. So the next story here is something that we actually have covered already on this show, looking at the scandal around the Air Pollution Control Division in Colorado. There are allegations from whistleblowers, several of them represented by the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or PEER, this group that is known for standing up for those who do care about the environment within these agencies and are trying to work against the industry capture that a lot of them face. So within this Air Pollution Control Division, there have been stories by the Colorado Sun that has primarily been staying on top of this to highlight the abuses around awarding industry permits and related to like the amount of pollution that's going to be accepted, or about whether they're going to greenlight permits based on the impact that those permits would have on the environment. So we're talking about mining companies that seek permits, energy companies that seek permits, and the degradation that's going to come from their presence in communities. And this division oversees whether to grant them the ability to do their business and engage in their extractive sort of operations. The latest involves a request to expand the investigation in the state to include allegations involving, quote, the state's handling of multiple coal-fired power plants and Newmont Mining's Cripple Creek and Victor Coal Mine in one of the counties in Colorado. The whistleblowers claim the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, quote, has not only done a disservice to Colorado's public, but has unnecessarily endangered their health and well-being by exposing them to high levels of air pollution that could and should have been prevented. And this is according to attorneys at PEER. Additionally, some of these same whistleblowers have called attention to how a permit for a refinery owned by Suncor Energy was granted, and this is in Commerce City in Colorado. So there are environmental injustice issues. There's apparently vulnerable populations there and concern about them taking advantage of that community. Attorneys for the state employee whistleblowers, this is according to Colorado Sun, say the memo was still in force at the division months ago. So there's an illegal memo that is at issue here that should not have been used. in order to grant a renewal permit for the Suncor refinery. The attorneys say that one of the points that certain short-term pollution totals projected by Suncor don't need to be modeled by state computers relied on a 2010 memo with the same unlawful conclusions that had been protested to the EPA. So there's allegations that there's an improper practice going on within the Air Pollution Control Division as it relates to the Suncor refinery. And all of this, again, has gotten a lot of attention because Colorado is higher altitudes in many parts of the state, near mountains. The air pollution and air qualities receives quite a lot of attention. And it does have the oil and gas industry. It does have mining industries. And there are federal lands. There are other lands that are being plundered by these companies. And the impact of it has been a great issue for the state in recent years, especially as it deals with warming weather or climate change. So this is why it's crucial to follow this. In addition to the fact that pollution can dirty the air, it also contributes to the emissions that make it harder for the state. So that's that story.
Excellent. Let's move over now to Seattle, where the mayor's phone was set to delete text messages after 30 days. Sounds a little dicey. Why don't you walk us through this report?
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of detail beyond the mere fact of what's reported here. There is a whistleblower investigation. There's been some oversight agency that has dug into what was going on with her phone. And I think what makes this an important story is the fact that the period in which we're missing text messages comes from the time when there were Black Lives Matter demonstrations in response to the murder of George Floyd. And if you go to Seattle, there was a lot that was happening on the ground there with protests. It was quite a hotbed for the rebellion that was happening, that uprising that was taking place. And we know that from that time period, there was tear gassing. There were a lot of crowd control munitions that were deployed by the police, quite a harsh response within Seattle. And so I'm laying out some of the issues that would make this time period sensitive, in which you would want to know what the mayor, Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan, was dealing with as a public official. And yet, because any texts older than 30 days were automatically deleted, we don't know what we're losing that was not preserved. So as you dig into this, you've got texts that were not retained from late August 2019 to June 25th, 2020, according to this whistleblower investigation. And on one of the three phones issued, basically, as an official, she had the retention set to 30 days. And you can actually have other settings. It does mention in this that you can have it set for a year retention, or you can also have a forever retention choice. And it really doesn't make sense from a city perspective or someone who's involved in oversight that you would have any official who would be doing the automatic deletion of records after 30 days. You could even argue that you shouldn't even be setting it for a 1-year deletion, because all of these records have to be available if there's any kind of ethics complaints that need to be investigated. So there's not much to say beyond the fact that this raises some key questions about what was going on. The Washington Coalition for Open Government and some of these other agencies in the state are really just concerned about the way open records are being preserved here and trying to get ahead of this. It's not clear that something is actually being concealed, but it's just the mere fact that this isn't supposed to be the way that city allows. So, are there other officials that have this where text messages are being deleted after 30 days? I think it's something to investigate, because it's become crucial in the digital age to keep track of how these records are being archived and maintained. We've seen issues with people operating private email servers. That was the scandal around Hillary Clinton's emails. That's led to questions about Trump officials and their own private accounts. Just about anybody, Republican or Democrat, who has wanted to maintain some kind of privacy while also doing official business. We've asked questions about the way in which they've organized so that they could skirt open government requests. And I think what remains to be answered is this a deliberate thing to get around open records, or is it just something that was set up as a standard where there really wasn't any consideration of what it would look like if it was found out that after 30 days messages were being deleted?
Thank you, Kevin. For our next story here, we have the Biden administration defending Trump subpoenas against Washington Post reporters. What do you have here?
Yeah, it's a fairly important story. Over at the Freedom of the Press Foundation, we get a nice summary for those who can't get behind the paywall over at Washington Post. It says that on Friday, it was revealed, that would be last week, on May 7th, that the Justice Department under Trump had obtained the phone records of 3 national security journalists with a subpoena, likely approved by Attorney General Bill Barr. And these subpoenas are now being defended, apparently, by the Biden administration. Excuse me. It's pointed out that this likely relates to some stories that were ongoing into alleged Russian election interference in 2016. That was obviously something that captivated the press, continues to hold sway over much of the media establishment, with national security reporters and even people who aren't national security reporters having sources and positions in government that they were speaking to. You can see how the Trump administration might have wanted to greenlight investigations into any leaks that were going around this investigation, which they perceived as an effort to try and take down the Trump White House. So the fact that they could abuse their power is something that is at issue here in this. And we see now a critical issue opening up around the Biden administration. We've talked about the problem of the Biden administration continuing the prosecution against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. That's tangentially related. And then this involves media subpoenas, and there's guidelines that were drafted under Attorney General Eric Holder. We believe that they were likely ignored or flouted by the Trump administration. It's supposed to be the case that journalists are notifying news organizations when they obtain their records that involve their reporters. Most cases that would come in advance, and they would know that there was a criminal investigation in which they had to sweep them up and go through some of their records. But there was no advance notification, apparently, in this case that we're dealing with here of the reporters. And so you see the Justice Department wanting to contrast itself with the Trump Justice Department. We just went past World Press Freedom Day with Secretary of State Antony Blinken making pronouncements that made it seem like the U.S. is uniquely suited to lecture and tell other countries how to protect press freedom. And meanwhile, this shows a disregard for the effect of the Justice Department on journalists who are doing their work. And it shows that we really shouldn't be lecturing China or Russia as long as we either have Julian Assange in a prison in Belmarsh, or we continue to go after media sources with the Espionage Act, or in this case, we are subpoenaing in these criminal investigations in a manner that undermines people's ability, if they're journalists, to protect their confidential sources. And we don't know the position of Attorney General Merrick Garland on all of this. We don't know what the position is going to be on media subpoenas as far as the guidelines go. There's a whole lot of questions because we just haven't seen Merrick Garland and the Justice Department step out and deal with this. And even with World Press Freedom Day, they somehow avoided. They didn't really come out to take any of these matters head on and to confront the problems of the last 4 years with the Trump Justice Department. So how do they depart from the past? Or is this continuity that we often see from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden now going to continue, which a lot of people who recognize how government works will point out to you that there's really not a whole lot that changes. You continue to see reporters be collateral damage in these criminal investigations. Whatever they're investigating, we don't even know what they're investigating. If it has to do with alleged Russian interference, is that tied to some kind of a case that the Justice Department was putting together, or is there some other more nefarious reason that isn't tied to any specific effort to hold somebody accountable?
Thank you, Kevin. Tell us what is happening with drone whistleblower Daniel Hale, who has been arrested and jailed.
Yeah, so before we get to the final part of our show, we give the update on Julian Assange. This is something that I covered last week, but we didn't have a show. And would like to just make sure that everyone knows that drone whistleblower Daniel Hale is in jail and awaiting his sentencing on July 13th. It's quite unfortunate what happened because Daniel Hale was out on supervised release. He did nothing to violate his conditions. And yet, if you look at the court docket, at some point, the government, along with the court, agreed that there was some pretext for revoking his bail, and they took him into custody. And he, like I said, he was doing everything he was instructed to do. And it's known that he was meeting with a therapist. The court was aware that there were some mental health problems that he was dealing with personally, and likely tied to his time as a veteran in Joint Special Operations Command. This is a whistleblower who exposed the targeted assassination complex, who was involved in designating targets or was part of the unit of people that designate targets for killer capture, and disclosed information to Jeremy Scahill for the drone papers and for his book on the assassination complex. And so this facility he's in now is the Alexandria Detention Center. It's the same facility where Chelsea Manning attempted suicide. It's the same facility that was part of the Judge Vanessa Baretzer's decision to reject the extradition request against Julian Assange because she was concerned about what would happen to him if he was extradited and held in this facility during pretrial confinement or detention. And so I understand that he's in some conditions that amount to solitary confinement, sleeping on a cement bed, and this isolation is likely going to add to any stress or duress that he's going through as a result of this case. And he'll be there until the sentencing date in July. And I'll continue to stay on top of this case. But this is the first whistleblower who Joe Biden convicted. They secured a guilty plea from Daniel Hale under his administration on March 31st. So that makes him the first whistleblower convicted under the Espionage Act. And he was indicted by the Trump administration. So this shows, again, the continuity of picking up where Trump left off and keeping this war on whistleblowers going.
Thanks, Kevin. And finally here, as we do at the end of all of our shows, what is the update with Julian Assange?
There's not a whole lot to throw out there. We still do not have a hearing date for an appeal. We do not really know if the High Court of Justice is going to hear this appeal or decide not to review it. And that said, I can now tell you that the European Journalists Federation has put Julian Assange on their list of media that are in jail or prison. And so they keep a list of people who are jailed, the EFJ, and updated in May. They have added Julian Assange. He's the only journalist in the UK that is jailed currently. And then others on their list, we have we have Ukraine has and Russia's on the list with several, about nearly a dozen people. Belarus, Azerbaijan, and Turkey has dozens of people in its jail system that are journalists and media workers. And then you have in the UK, Julian Assange, who's there at the behest of the United States, and the UK continues to keep him there, along with the support or the indifference that is shown by members of the Five Eyes countries that are working with our national security establishment. So Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and these other countries that form this coalition, they are not really doing much to stick up for Julian Assange while he is in this in jail. And this has been a big issue for like the Committee to Protect Journalists refuses to designate Julian Assange as a journalist, and they came up with their own arbitrary criteria for why they won't list him as one, even though he's part of the International Federation of Journalists. He's also part of the Media, Entertainment, and Arts Alliance in Australia. And so absolutely from that standpoint, he's a journalist. And they made up something about him being a source and not a journalist, which makes him actually more vulnerable to this U.S. prosecution. And so this is a nice break from the orthodoxy in the United States for this federation to step forward and add Julian Assange to this list.
Wonderful. Great show today, Kevin. Thank you for all of your work in pulling that together. Why don't you wrap things up for us? Tell us a little bit about what's going on with the Dissenter, anything coming up next week, anything you want to talk about.
First off, there's a question here about whether I know if Julian has been vaccinated in jail yet. And as far as I know, I'm not sure. Although Stella did put it to people that Julian was eligible, or that he could have the opportunity to get the AstraZeneca vaccine. And then the problems of crowdsourcing with people what vaccine to take just took hold. And I think she learned that that should not really be a public discussion. It's a private matter that Julian has been dealing with to see, whether, any of these vaccines are going to have an adverse effect on him physically, or if, he wants to take a certain one, or if he wants to wait for a certain type of vaccine to be made available, because we know there are at least 3 or 4 different versions that you can take. And as far as I know, I'm not sure if he's been able to receive it yet. So with that said, this is right now my newsletter, and it is right now my newsletter because very soon I'm going to transition to a new address and have my own site for the work that we're doing around these whistleblower stories. We are leaving Substack, and we'll have our own site for this work. We'll be doing more expansion with journalists like Mohammed Almazi contributing to the newsletter, and hopefully cranking up the kind of work that we're able to do, and hopefully growing, having more subscribers and more people engage with this work by leaving Substack, as I felt like it's hampered my ability to really take things to the next level. Substack's great for those who want to do basic postings every day. But as far as the platform, it's not really great for independent media. And I have more to say. I'm going to be posting a bit about what's gone on during my time at Substack. But for now, I just want to let you know that you can go there, you can subscribe. But in the next week here, if you're a recent subscriber, you're going to want to double check to make sure you're still receiving the newsletter, because we will be on a new platform. And if you didn't survive the migration, you might want to come back and resubscribe to it just to make sure you continue to receive it. There will be a free newsletter that is maintained, and then there will be a paid newsletter. And then there's going to be some additional things about what you get if you're able to support and give. And hopefully we'll be able to have tiers where people can give what they're able to based on their income. And I'm really excited for what we're going to be able to develop. And then that adds on to the work that we're doing at Shadowproof, which if you want to come back, Brian, we can close the show by mentioning some of what we've done this past week. We still have the Marvel Cook Fellowship, which is a result of this grant money that we've been able to use to fund reporting that is on stories around policing and prisons. And this latest one, I don't know if you want to summarize it for people who have been following, but it looks like it's been a really solid piece about women's prisons.
Yeah, thank you. We published a piece that we have been working on for a few months now. It is a long read, but I definitely encourage you to check it out. Spend some time reading it this weekend, or if you got one of those cool apps that'll like read an article to you, this might be a good one for that. It features a lot of voices and testimonies from people who are involved in the movement to secure reparations and justice beyond reparations for women or for people who have survived forced sterilizations in California women's prisons over pretty much the last 110, 115 years. This is something that has been ongoing in California, and indeed is a relic of the eugenics movement in the United States at the beginning portion of the 20th century. And in the piece, the author Citlali Pizarro both dives into the history of sterilizations in women's prisons in California, as well as the larger trend of sterilizations since the eugenics movement. She talks to women who discovered years later that they were sterilized by the prisons without their consent, and chronicles their efforts to win justice both for the survivors who are still alive. Some of these people were sterilized, within the last decade. It is still ongoing, even though it's been outlawed in California. But as well as the survivors who are no longer with us now that this has been going on for so long. So it's a fantastic piece. I highly recommend folks check it out. It's been doing very well, and I'm very pleased with that. And we still have probably a half dozen stories still to come from the Marvel Cook Foundation. So yeah, thank you for giving space to that.
Yeah, and for those of you who give to me, and for those who just give to Shadowproof in general, this is the kind of journalism that you fund, whether it's on the case of Craig Murray or any other thing that we do related to whistleblowers going forward, or these kinds of stories that are really hard hitting, heavy, get to some really sensitive matters. That makes this kind of journalism possible. We really do work on this kind of thing without spending a lot of time on clickbait, and without spending a lot of time on trying to ride some kind of trend that is paying off for progressive media at the time. I mean, you didn't see a story go up at Shadowproof this past week about Liz Cheney, and that's because we just don't care to get into that discourse. There's no reason to engage. So some of these political stories that seem to capture our news cycle and our attention, even if we're outraged by them, we keep focused and we do the things that really can have the impact beyond a 24-hour or 48-hour period. Because I'm certain that 6 months or 12 months from now, when somebody wants to know what happened to Craig Murray, they're going to come back to Mohammed's piece. And when somebody wants to know about the issue of sterilization in women's prisons, they're going to come across what Sitlali has written, and they're going to come across these pieces that we're publishing on policing as they want to dig into those issues. I mean, there's one coming up next week about a small town in New York and the Black Lives Matter movement and the organizing that's gone on around people there, to just show that there's a lot of grassroots activism, not even just in urban areas of the country, not even just in major cities, but in smaller towns. There are people who have taken it upon themselves to challenge their city police departments. So that's just, my way of making a statement about what we do very assertively, to say that I'm proud that we keep our focus and maintain this without letting the kind of cycle that comes from the Biden administration drive what we're doing. I mean, there's some stuff that they're doing that merits attention, and every so often we'll wade into that. But we really are not susceptible to the MSNBC way of following politics, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I could go on and talk for an hour off of that. So I think you put it very well, and I'm sure that we have our birthday, whatever it's been, 6, 7. How many years will it be in August? We have our birthday coming up, and I'm sure we'll take some time, like we did in years past, to talk about the what we're trying to accomplish and why our journalism is different than some of the journalism you'll see elsewhere. And even more generally, why supporting independent media is so critical, and why it's so important to spread your money around to smaller independent journalists and publications, and not just the ones with huge reach and huge platforms and notoriety, because we do need, whether it's for documentary purposes or for political education purposes, we need this kind of journalism that's grounded in history, that has a focus on political education and doesn't treat everything that's happening in the world as brand new and out of left field. So that's really why we are focused and trying to do the things that we are good at doing, instead of chasing every spat on Twitter or what have you. So
last thing, Zippity says, why not have a clickable link for your donations on this stream? I think that's a good question. Why not?
How do we do that?
I would love to do that. As far as I know, anyone can donate with YouTube. We see it as like a super chat, but other than that, I suppose we could put something in the video that people could click. I'm not that savvy. So if anybody wants to email the editor at Shadowproof account and tell us, because I'm sure other channels have figured this out. If anybody wants to reveal the open secret to us dumb, not tech savvy people,
we're journalists. We're not.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by the question, but will I continue my coverage of Assange is a question that I see here in the chat. And of course, I'm going to keep it up. If you mean at this new genesis of this newsletter, I mean, absolutely. No matter what happens, no matter where I am, I'm going to follow this case to its bitter end. Obviously, there are horrific, ghastly ways in which it could come to an end, and then there are ways that are more hope-filled, that and no matter what trajectory it takes, I'm going to follow it until it reaches a conclusion. So I think that's good. I think we've run our course as far as this show goes.
Great.
So thank you for doing this, Brian. I always appreciate having you help me go through these stories.
Yeah, and thanks for putting the work in each week for our wonderful viewers out there. Thank you for tuning in. We will be here same time, same place next week. And yeah, you can, again, type this in to your browser to sign up for Kevin's newsletter. There's also shadowproof.com/donate for all of your donation needs. And we will work on getting a clickable link like it's the 21st century for our wonderful viewers. So thank you all, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.